Kinetics has been made in association with Road Race Parts. Top quality, best prices, no compromise. Head to roadraceparts.com to get parts for your racing vehicles now.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Velocity Kinetics. Today I'm going to have just a very quick talk about engines in F1, current situation, etc. The big thing going on at the moment, McLaren have apparently announced that they're interested in making their own engine for 2021. Whether that's a good move, whether McLaren are going to stick with Honda, whether Fernando is going to still be at McLaren, whether Toro Rosso are going to take Honda, and then whether Red Bull then subsequently take Honda on if it works for Toro Rosso. And then the usual V6s have done nothing for F1, etc. So, McLaren making their own engine. It's potentially a good move. I'm not really sure how to word it. It's on the one hand, it's potentially a good move because they make their own engines for the road cars for their road cars at the moment. But at the same time, McLaren has never once made its own engine in its entire history. And given the fast they've had with Honda, could they repeat the same thing and as in have a complete fast being a McLaren? That said, it could be another avenue of income for them. So not just being an engine supply for themselves, they could then supply engines for other teams on the grid. Then it would mean that we'd have potentially Ferrari, Renault, Mercedes, and a McLaren Power, whatever they call themselves, whether it is a McLaren engine, or whether they come up with some strange name. And then possibly with Cosworth coming back, you then potentially have 5 engine suppliers at that point, and Porsche potentially coming in, and rumours that there are other manufacturers want to come in, so you could have a great mix of engines. So, it's not a bad idea for McLaren to do it. I think they should be very wary because of how spectacularly wrong it's gone with Honda. Next up, McLaren and Honda. What's going on? There's been, as of yet, from what I've been looking around on the internet so far today, there's been no official announcement as to what they are doing. Supposedly Fernando Alonso has taken down any reference to McLaren off his Twitter feed, and any reference to Honda. Minardi, as in Giancarlo Minardi, the person who used to own the Minardi F1 team, has said that McLaren are going to switch to Renault engines and Toro Rosso will be taking Honda. I'm not sure whether that's a good move or not. I think the underlying problem with Honda is that it's only got McLaren for data. McLaren to test, McLaren for data. They've not got any benchmark to work out whether the chassis is any good. I mean, the engine's not helping matters either. But the problem is we don't know how bad the Honda is because we don't know how good the McLaren chassis is. I think the McLaren chassis is there or thereabouts. And I do agree that the Honda engine is letting it down a bit. But I don't think the car is as aerodynamically efficient as McLaren believe it actually is. They need to have another team to provide Honda with data. Now, I personally think Sauber have done a stupid thing in going with Ferrari rather than taking Honda. The reason being is in all their years as Sauber, ignore the BMW element, BMW Sauber or BMW Sauber, I think is what they were called. In their whole time they used Ferrari power, they were always sort of a middling team. If this is a team that's got aspirations to do better and even attempt to get back to where they were before, so as in where they were with Kamui Kobayashi and Perez, they actually had a very good car. And the engine they had helped because it was Ferrari powered. So if they want to start making progress, Honda might be the way to go, because then they can start enticing some Japanese sponsorship onto the car. They might be able to get a Japanese driver in again. They might even be able to convince Ferrari to release Kamui Kobayashi back to them, depending on what he's. I think he is racing with Ferrari in endurance, or he was. So what to do? I don't know whether Toro Rosso will actually take it until they announce it. We don't know. The problem is, and I saw a little bit of this on a Sky F1 report, Whereas McLaren's engineers are going, it's a no-brainer to get rid of the Honda engine. Toro Rosso's engineers will be going, it's a no-brainer, we don't want the Honda engine. And I think it was Pat Fry who said that on the Sky F1 report. It's a valid point. Like, if one team doesn't want it for that reason, what makes you think the other team's going to want it? If it's a case of where Red Bull are postulating it across and just not liking being a works team anymore, Honda is a good way for them to go. Supply the big team and the junior team, and then the junior team know what it's like from they've only got to change and adapt to a new chassis, not a new engine. That said, the advantage of having the junior team running a different engine is when you then progress up to the bigger team, you then know how the other engine works. Like Verstappen said when he'd driven a Toro Rosso with the Ferrari engine, he knew whereabouts the Ferrari would be harvesting power. So then when he was in the lead with the Renault engine, he could take advantage of it, knowing where Ferrari were lagging behind. And then it also means you've gotten used to another engine. For instance, if someone wants to go up to Ferrari or another team powered by Ferrari, they'll know what the engine feels like. If they go into another team powered by Mercedes, they'll know what the engine feels like. And if they go into a completely different team with a different engine, then they can bring over some information. Well, the Ferrari engine doesn't drive very as nice as this Renault engine, or the Renault engine, it's lagging a little bit in terms of the Ferrari and hitting these particular points. So if Renault can improve, blah 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 blah. So there's a lot of good and bad things, and let's not forget, because Honda are effectively a works supplier for McLaren, McLaren get quite a bit of money. It's rumoured to be $100 million a year for running Ferrari power. Not Ferrari. What am I talking about? Running Honda power. So if McLaren swap to Renault, aside from the McLaren, Renault doesn't run off the tongue very nicely, and it just... I know you've got to try something different to win, but I wonder whether McLaren are just getting too desperate, if that makes sense. I personally would like to see McLaren persevere with Honda. Not because I don't like McLaren. I mean, I'm not fond of the way they go about doing things. But someone has got to have Honda and put up with the problems. Honda themselves, I will say, have let themselves down quite spectacularly. Again, it was on the Sky F1 report. Someone did make a very valid point. Honda, in its entire time in F1, in its previous incarnation as BAR and then Honda before it became Braun, only won one race with Jenson Button in Hungary. That was it. In the years where BAR were the second team in F1, where Ferrari BAR, because McLaren and Williams had just dropped off for some reason. I think Williams had gone to Cosworth, or the BMW engines were very sensitive. I can't remember exactly what happened then. But the problem is then the BAR was not exactly in a position to pick up the pieces if Ferrari dropped the ball. The only way I can describe it is the gap between Ferrari and BAR at that point was a bit like the gap between Mercedes and Williams at the start of the turbo regulations, because Williams were effectively the second team in F1 for a long time, and the Williams car was, I mean, it was pretty good, but the void between the two was just enormous. Williams couldn't be there to capitalise on the Mercedes mistake. Oh, it's I think it's something to do with the way Honda and their management go about things. I don't think they understand how serious this is. It's not a particularly good show. And I know Honda have now moved into doing 1 litre 3-cylinder engines as well, in their Civic and the Jazz, and I'm not sure how far up the range that engine is available. But the problem is, again, if they're going to smaller in turbo, then how good or bad is that 1 litre engine on the road? Never mind what the engine's like in the F1 car. They can't even get the road car engine right. How the hell are they going to get the F1 engine right? It's a very public embarrassment. Mercedes have offered staff to help Honda, and Honda have, as I gather, said no, which I think is ridiculous. Like, hey, here's some help. Don't want it. You know, it's a bit like if you're studying for an English A-level and you've got a sibling who's done an English degree, like your sibling can offer you the help. You know, it's sort of a case of, I can help you. I've got a lot more expertise in this area, so here's some help. Then you can go, thank you, plow on. So Honda haven't helped themselves too much, but I think McLaren need to stick with Honda, have some consistency. I don't care about Fernando Alonso, to be honest. He is a phenomenal driver. He is, by far and away, he is probably the most talented driver on the grid, as demonstrated by these performances in the subpar car. And he just hasn't got the championships to go along with his skill. But from what I've heard, he's not very good at directing a team in what they need to do. Which is unlike Jenson Button, who was very good at telling the team what they need to do to improve. Alonso, I think, is still very much in this superstar. Thinks he is this big superstar. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't become a two-time champion for nothing. You don't beat the great Michael Schumacher without having some talent. You don't keep Lewis Hamilton on his toes without having some talent, and vice versa. You don't go to Ferrari unless you've got the talent. You don't stay at Ferrari as long as you did unless you've got the talent. But he's found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time so frequently. If I was him, I would take some time out, go off and do IndyCar or something, come back to F1 with unfinished business. Or, alternatively, my opinion would be to go to Williams. I know I'm biased with wanting a driver who will just take the Williams by the scruff of the neck and absolutely ring it. I know Massa's doing as good a job as he can, but imagine what the Williams could do in the hands of Alonso. So Honda need to have another team. They can't afford to supply one team. They need to be supplying at least two, so they can get two lots of data, so then they know just how much of it is the engine, how much is aerodynamics. Going forwards for the 2021 regulations, no one's announced what they are going to be yet. I myself, yes, admittedly, I was not sold initially on the going back to a turbo F1 car. And I was not very well sold on the Kurz when it originally came out, but in its current form, I have to admit, it's brilliant. Because the engines have got torque to them. Previously, with a naturally aspirated car, you just don't get the same levels of torque you do with a turbo. Now, I know this is a very basic comparison, but I had a last generation Suzuki Swift for my first car. 65 plate, little red thing. I called it Algernon because I don't know why I did. It just seemed a good idea at the time. It had plenty of get up and go, but there were plenty of occasions where it just didn't seem to have enough power. Now, before people start shouting, "Oh, you might have had lots of options," I had the most basic model. I had an SZ2, so I didn't have 5 doors. I only had 3. I didn't have proper alloys. I had steels with alloy covers. So it was about as basic as you could get without going down to buying a Celerio. And whilst it was fantastic on twisty roads, there were occasions where there was just no torque. Compare that to what I've got now in a Suzuki Baleno with a 1 litre 3-cylinder turbo. I've got power just about anywhere I want it. Aside from low down, obviously, when the turbo hasn't kicked in. Now, it's not a completely fair comparison because the Swift had 94 horsepower. What I've got 111. It's not masses of horsepower, but it's about as close a comparison as I can get. And let's not forget the Baleno is a bigger car. I've got air conditioning. I've got sat nav. I've got 5 doors. It's got reversing camera. So weight for weight, the Baleno is a heavier car. But it's in many aspects, it's much more fun to drive because it's got torque. F1 engines in the previous generation, whilst they were really high powered, they didn't have a lot of torque for the power that they had. When you generate brake horsepower, you are naturally going to produce torque. Torque is basically twisting power, pulling power. That's why a lot of people who tow things prefer a diesel engine, because whilst a diesel may not have the same amount of power, so it may not have the same brake horsepower output, the torque that helps it pull is better. So if you're going to say tow a caravan, you're better off having something TDI, turbo diesel. You're better off having a turbo diesel than a turbo petrol, because the diesel will have more torque and just make it easier, and the torque is lower down the range. Turbo petrol, the torque's a bit further up. The torque is what makes, the only way I can put it, if you're not towing anything, if you dump a lot of torque out of your engine, or dump the power at the right band, the wheels spin. Now, I had to put a lot of power on in the Swift to make the wheels spin. In the Baleno, I don't have to put on quite as much because the torque's available a lot lower down the rev range. That's why people who have diesel cars will be replacing the tyres more often and might find it easier to spin the wheels, because the torque's being put down, and depending on how gently you put your power down, you're more likely to spin them. That's just a simple fact. So you've got these F1 cars out that are nice and twitchy because they're trying to put the torque down, not just the brake. They're not just dealing with the brake horsepower and harvesting energy. It's torque generated both by the turbo engine and the electric hybrid. I never thought it was going to be as interesting and as exciting as it is. Yes, I agree. It's not they don't make a particularly good noise. You'll probably need to either focus on more engine combustion. I'm not sure which way you would need to do it. I think you would need to go down a size, so maybe shrink them down to 1.3 V6s or something like that, because then there's smaller displacement, and trying to put the same amount of power, it should in theory make more noise. The alternative would be to say up them to say 1.8, 1.9 V6s, then you've got a little bit more focus on engine power. So it's what to do. F1 needs to remain relevant to the road, and electric and hybrid is the way most people are going. Volvo announced they're going hybrid only. Jaguar recently announced that they're going to be selling electric and mostly hybrid vehicles shortly. Volvo are planning to do this as soon as 2019. Every vehicle of theirs will be hybrid. Even silly little city cars. Well, silly as in, it's silly as in the sense of a tiny little city car you'd think just put a little 1 litre engine in it and that'll be fine. When my sister bought her Swift, we test drove a Swift that was hybrid. It's available on just about any model in most ranges. So you know, it's incredible. And Mercedes, I mentioned they're interested in joining Formula E. Porsche, Audi, BMW on about joining Formula E. Jaguar is in Formula E. Electric is the way to go. Tesla have had a phenomenal increase in sales because of being electric. I've seen quite a few around here in the UK, in the northeast. Didn't think I ever would. I thought that would remain a pipe dream. But no, I've seen, there's at least one a day I see up here. Probably, I believe it's the same one, but nonetheless, it's here. I appreciate it'll cost the person an arm and a leg to buy it. And I see quite a few Nissan Leafs around as well. It's electric is the way forward. So I think Red Bull postulating, saying these V6 hybrids have done nothing for F1. Like, shut the fuck up, is my opinion. Putting it bluntly, shut the fuck up. You're cross because you're not winning. That's it. You're lashing out wherever you can, making yourself heard, but all you're doing is standing there like a spoilt child. I do agree the regulations need to be a little bit more simpler, and they need to improve the cost. And how can they improve the cost? By not changing the engines, is my opinion. Because they've done all the R&D on them. Well, some teams have done all the R&D on them. That said, in some aspects, they do need to do a reset, so Mercedes just doesn't have the advantage that it's got. But then that's starting to affect the Mercedes-powered teams, and it starts to get a little bit unfair and unsporting in other places. So, what would be the best regulations to have? People are screaming, go back to the V8s, go back to the V10. It's not relevant. It's just not relevant. Maybe you could supercharge the V8, but a supercharger whine just wouldn't sound... It wouldn't sound pleasant, in my opinion. I don't dispute that the V6s are quite muted on the track, but as I've said in quite a few videos, look at what happened when the Pagani went from the Zonda F to the Wire. The Wire was twin-turboed V12. The Zonda F was a naturally aspirated. The Zonda F screams like an F1 V10 engine. The Wire is very muted. it doesn't take a genius to work out that a turbo engine is going to be quieter. And what will eternally pee me off and annoy me is when they developed these regulations for the 1.6 turbos, did nobody think to put it in the back of a car and put it around a track to see what it sounded like? Just leave that thought out there, because it's something that should have happened and never did. So onwards into 2021, I would like to see more of this hybrid, because with more people saying they're going to be buying, more people wanting to buy hybrids taking up more of the marketplace, and electric only becoming more popular, F1 can't afford to ignore it. So how cool would it be now? I appreciate a few years ago, I think I did a blog saying, oh, it's absolutely rubbish, a stupid thing, or it could, at best I think I said it would be quite interesting having the cars enter the pit on electric only power. But thinking about it now, actually that probably would be exceedingly interesting, especially if a team has an electric engine failure and having to go back to having to rely on the petrol to get in and out the pits. It actually creates quite an interesting conflict. Whether they go down and drop down to 4 cylinders or 5 cylinders, so do a V4 or a V5 or an inline, or go to straight 6s, I don't know, because the V6 is quite compact, so it will help the cars keep their current shape rather than expanding out the back of the car unnecessarily. I think maybe what they need to do is they need to say, right, maximum power output is, say, 900 horsepower, or the equivalent 900 horsepower per tonne, or whatever the regulation is. Say it's got to be at this much, but you need to be producing at least 200 horsepower from electric only, or 300 horsepower from electric only. And maybe even do it so the hybrid system is available for the entire lap, not just for 30 seconds. Make it available the entire way round. And I think we will see a lot of very interesting developments. How to keep the costs down, I don't know. I personally think that some of the teams have seen it as an opportunity to rubber stamp money, rubber stamp a massive price tag on the engines, license to print money, and I don't really think that's fair, because if a team can afford to say, if Mercedes could afford to let Pascal Wehrlein drive the Manor in exchange for not having Manor pay for their engines, then they're actually not as expensive as everyone thought they would be. I actually personally think that Mercedes are probably making at least 5 million profit per engine. I don't think they're selling them at cost price. Maybe that's the way to drive costs down. You sell it to the other teams at cost price. Tough if you spent all that money on R&D. That was your decision to do that. Anyway, we'll just leave it there for today, just to have a think. In regards to updates, at some point, when I can work out how it's going to be easiest to do it, Russ and I are probably going to try and do a Skype version of this, or something similar, so it's 2 of us. Russ is going to try and get some videos up at some point, but the big thing is we may be making its own dedicated channel rather than a dedicated playlist on my channel. My previous videos, if I can find where I filed them on the computer, will be uploaded onto that other channel. So you'll have all the way back to when I did it in front of a red wall rather than a green screen. Then all the previous videos in front of green screens will go in as well. But we'll try and redo the logo and the ID, the ident, ID. I've asked my brother exactly what the right term is. The start and end slates that I use. We'll have to find a way of rejigging and redoing those. So anyone who watches these on a regular basis, be prepared. There should, in theory, be quite a raft of changes. We talked about F1 technical changes. Velocity Kinetics undergoing a few technical changes itself. And at some point, hopefully this year, I'm going to try and do a proper car review, because it's something I always would have liked to have gone into automotive journalism. I'd have loved to have that competition for next Top Gear presenter. I did my best on it, and I don't know what the hell happened. As I gather, it sort of went tits up and sideways, and Chris Evans was a bit of a diva over it. But I would have loved to have been considered for that. I would love to have gone forwards with that. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't know how well or how well it will go or not. I will need my brother to help me film it, because, well, He's the one with the media production degree. I'm the one with the sociology degree. So we'll just leave that there. Anyway, look after yourselves, drive safe, and we'll see you when we can next see you.
Velocity Kinetics has been made in association with Road Race Parts. Top quality, best prices, no compromise. Head to roadraceparts.com to get parts for your racing vehicles now.